Has this ever happened to you? You withdraw, not as a game, not as a strategy, but because your spirit has been wounded by his indifference, his arrogance, his careless words, and suddenly his world begins to quake. He tells himself he is unbothered, that her silence means nothing, but deep down, in the caverns of the male psyche, silence is not empty, silence is a mirror, silence is the ghost of himself staring back at him, unmasked, unforgiving. When a woman goes silent, it is not merely an absence of sound, it is the absence of her nurturing presence, the absence of the energy he once fed upon unconsciously. Carl Jung spoke of the anima, the feminine archetype living inside every man. When you fall quiet, when your voice retreats into shadow, his anima stirs restlessly. For your silence awakens that hidden feminine within him, a voice he cannot control, a longing he cannot tame. He may not know why he suddenly feels restless, irritated, even haunted. He believes he misses you. In truth, he is confronting the part of himself he has spent his entire life avoiding. Most men thrive on noise. The noise of your approval, your questions, your laughter, your protests, even your anger. For noise is nourishment to the ego. It reminds him he exists, that he matters, that someone is orbiting around his gravitational pull. But when the noise dies, when you sink into that deep feminine stillness, he is forced into a confrontation far more terrifying than your words could ever be. He is forced to face the silence of his own soul. In that silence, his ego begins to crack. Jung wrote that the shadow, the rejected, disowned self, emerges when the masks fall, and your silence rips away his mask. Suddenly, the confident man, the dismissive lover, the one who thought he could always return to you when he pleased, now hears an echo louder than your voice, the echo of his own emptiness. He realizes he was never the one in control. It was always your presence, your emotional current, your willingness to respond that kept the illusion alive. And here lies the paradox. Your silence is not aggression, but to him it feels like the most powerful blow, because unlike your anger, unlike your tears, silence cannot be manipulated. He cannot twist it, cannot argue with it, cannot seduce it back into motion. Silence is incorruptible, and so he is left alone with the very thing most men fear, themselves. Do you feel it now? The weight of this power that was never about games or tactics, but about sovereignty. Silence is the language of the feminine unconscious. It is the moment when a woman ceases to over-explain, ceases to beg, ceases to trade her energy for crumbs of recognition. In silence, she steps out of the arena of his ego and retreats into the temple of her own being. And this temple terrifies him, for he cannot enter unless invited, and your silence means the gates are closed. What he feels is not only loss, but exposure. His mind races. Has she moved on? Has she lost interest? Has she seen through me? And beneath these thoughts lies something darker. What if I was never enough to begin with? That question eats at him in the night, a serpent whispering beneath his ribs. For your silence shines light on the wound he carries, the fear of insignificance. Do you see how silence, when it arises not from manipulation but from self-preservation, becomes alchemy? It transforms pain into power. It forces the masculine ego to reckon with what it has denied. It compels him to notice what he took for granted. But more than this, it changes you. For in your silence, you begin to hear your own voice again, the one drowned out by endless explanations, by the noise of his dismissals, by the desperate effort to make yourself understood. And once you taste that silence, you no longer fear it. You realize it was never empty, but full of your intuition, full of your breath, full of the ancient wisdom that does not need to speak in order to know. You become unshakable because you are no longer dependent on how he responds or whether he notices. You learn to sit in your silence as a queen sits upon her throne, not chasing, not proving, not convincing, simply being. This is what he feels when you go silent too long, the unraveling of his illusions, the cracking of his ego, the trembling of his certainty. And this is what you feel, the birth of your power, the rising of your worth, the remembrance that silence is not weakness, but sovereignty. Silence is not a void, but a vessel. It holds everything unspoken, everything unseen, everything he thought he could outrun. And so when you withdraw into it, he does not merely miss your voice, he begins to feel the hunger of his own unacknowledged soul. Jung once observed that most men are terrified of their inner depths, for the unconscious carries both the divine and the monstrous. Your silence is the key that unlocks that door against his will. Suddenly, he hears what was always there, the gnawing insecurities, the childhood echoes of not being chosen, the unfinished conversations with his own shadow. To him, your silence feels like rejection, but beneath that sting, it feels like revelation. It strips away the illusions he cloaked himself in, those masks of competence, dominance, and control. He begins to feel fragile, small, unsettled, though he may never admit it. And what is fragility to the male ego but humiliation? This is why silence is often more piercing than words. Words can be debated, dismissed, reinterpreted. Silence offers no escape. For you, it is something different. It is the initiation into your deepest power, the feminine power of withdrawal, not the withdrawal of bitterness, but the withdrawal of sacred energy. Silence is the refusal to feed what no longer nourishes you. It is the refusal to throw pearls before swine, to give explanations to ears that do not wish to hear. It is the beginning of individuation, that sacred Jungian journey, where a woman steps out of the projections cast upon her and begins to claim herself as whole. In silence, you unmask him, but you also unmask yourself. You see the truth of what you have carried, the need to explain, the compulsion to be understood, the fear of abandonment that made you pour your words endlessly into a vessel that never filled. Silence shows you the futility of feeding emptiness, and so it teaches you presence without performance, stillness without shame. The Stoics spoke of this kind of mastery long before Jung. Seneca wrote that true strength is found in the ability to remain unmoved by the actions of others. Marcus Aurelius, emperor yet student of the soul, observed that the power of a person lies in their ability to choose their own response, not to be enslaved by impulses. When you go silent, you are enacting this philosophy without even knowing it. You are practicing emotional sovereignty. You are saying, I will not spend my life as a reaction to you. I will dwell within myself. And though he may rage, though he may sulk, though he may test the walls of your silence with provocations or sudden attention, none of it touches you in the same way anymore. Because silence is not only the absence of sound, it is the presence of boundaries. Boundaries that he did not think you had. Boundaries that reveal to him you are not endlessly accessible, not endlessly forgiving, not endlessly waiting in the shadows for his return. This is why silence unsettles him so deeply. It shows him that you can exist without him, that your world does not orbit around his validation, that his presence is not a necessity, but a choice. And for the man who is accustomed to your endless availability, this truth feels like death. He senses a funeral taking place, but he cannot name it. What dies is the illusion that he is indispensable. Do you feel the subtle reversal here? In the beginning, silence may have felt like a wound for you, a reminder of abandonment. But as you grow into it, silence becomes liberation. It is no longer about him at all. It becomes a mirror of your own strength, your own ability to sit with discomfort, to stand sovereign in your own presence without grasping. And still, he feels the weight of it. He may call it indifference. He may accuse you of coldness. He may even pretend not to notice. But deep inside, in that place where the anima stirs and the shadow waits, he knows. He knows your silence is not weakness. He knows your silence has stripped him bare. And most of all, he knows that what he once took for granted, he may never have again. Your silence, stretched across time, begins to take on the texture of inevitability. At first, he waits. He tells himself you will return, that your absence is temporary, that you are simply cooling your temper. But the longer it lingers, the more it ceases to feel like an interruption and starts to feel like a new reality. And in that realization, panic brews beneath his skin, because silence, once prolonged, transforms from a passing moment into a message. You have chosen yourself over him. This is where the male psyche feels the sharpest cut, for the anima within him craves connection, craves the emotional water that only the feminine presence brings. When you withdraw it, he is left with his barren landscape, the desert of his own unexamined soul. Men often mistake this drought for abandonment by you, but what he is truly experiencing is abandonment by himself, a sudden, unbearable awareness of how little intimacy he has cultivated within his own being. Jung warned that what is not made conscious appears in our lives as fate, and so he projects. He will imagine your silence is cruelty, that you are punishing him, that perhaps you are entertaining someone else. But these are shadows of his own making, cast by the fear of losing possession, the terror of no longer holding your gaze. Your silence forces him into these projections, revealing how fragile his sense of self is without constant reflection from the feminine mirror. For you, however, the silence matures into something entirely different. It ceases to be about him. At first, you may feel him tugging at your thoughts, his memory haunting your solitude, but slowly the silence turns inward. You begin to hear not his voice, but your own. The self you had buried beneath explanations, beneath arguments, beneath the ache of trying to be seen. She rises, she whispers, "You were always enough." And in that whisper, a woman rediscovers the authority of her own being. This authority is not the brittle armor of pride, nor the sharp edge of revenge. It is the quiet knowing of the sovereign feminine, the knowing that her value does not increase or decrease with his attention, the knowing that she does not need to bargain with her energy, nor scatter her voice into ears that do not listen. In silence, she remembers her wholeness, and from this remembrance, she becomes untouchable. The Stoics would call this ataraxia, the unshakable peace of one who is no longer ruled by external winds. Epictetus taught that freedom lies not in controlling others, but in mastering one's own mind. And what greater mastery can there be than a woman who, once desperate for recognition, and now sits unbothered in the cathedral of her own silence? She is no longer a captive of his moods, his games, his absence. She is a sovereign state unto herself. Meanwhile, he paces the walls of his own unease. He may attempt to provoke you, to draw you back with sudden flares of charm or anger. He may even speak words of longing, words he once withheld. But even these attempts feel different to you now, for silence has sharpened your vision. You see not just his gestures, but the shadows behind them. You see whether he seeks you out of genuine recognition or simply as a balm for his loneliness. And with this clarity, you no longer fall for illusions. This is why silence, when embraced fully, becomes a crucible. It burns away not only his pretenses, but yours as well. It shows you what was real and what was projection. It forces him to face his ego without the cushion of your voice, and it forces you to face your worth without the crutch of his validation. Do you feel the sacred paradox? In giving him nothing, you give yourself everything. In refusing to feed his ego, you nourish your soul. In turning away from the endless spiral of words, you step into the infinite expanse of being. This is why silence is feared, and why it is holy. It dismantles illusions on both sides, leaving only the raw, unvarnished truth. And so he feels exposed, restless, cornered by his own shadow, while you, in contrast, feel lighter, freer, more grounded in yourself than ever before. This is the hidden alchemy of silence. It does not simply punish, it transforms. The longer silence holds, the more it shapes him. What began as irritation deepens into an ache, a gnawing awareness that cannot be silenced with distractions. He may throw himself into work, drown in noise, or chase fleeting pleasures, but every escape dissolves when the quiet hours return. There, in the stillness of night, your absence becomes a weight pressing against his chest. He begins to realize that he is not haunted by you alone, but by himself. Your silence has stripped him of the ability to blame, to argue, to dodge. It has cornered him in the one place he cannot run from, his own reflection. Jung wrote that the anima, the inner feminine, carries the key to a man's soul. When you withdraw your voice, your care, your emotional current, he is forced to confront his own anima directly and often violently. It is why men break under silence more than under fury. Fury is familiar, it keeps them engaged in the game of conflict. But silence hands them their anima raw and unmediated. It whispers of all the tenderness, all the vulnerability, all the unfinished wounds they tried to bury beneath power and performance, and he cannot stand it for long. You, on the other hand, begin to see silence not as absence, but as sanctuary. What first felt like exile becomes a homecoming. You discover how full the silence actually is, full of your intuition, full of your breath, full of truths you silence to preserve harmony. In silence, you realize you do not dissolve without his attention. You expand. You grow more real. You return to yourself. And this terrifies him, because he senses it, even from afar. He feels that you are no longer orbiting his gravity. He feels the invisible cord loosening. Do you see the dynamic here? When you speak endlessly, when you chase, when you argue, you anchor him in certainty. He knows you are still bound, but when you fall into silence, the ground shifts. He is left to wonder, left to fear, left to imagine. The masculine ego, which once fed on your responses, now feeds on its own shadows. And in those shadows, he begins to realize the truth. It was never you who depended on him as much as he depended on your energy. The Stoics would call this the turning point of mastery. Marcus Aurelius urged that power lies not in bending others to your will, but in freeing yourself from needing their approval. This is exactly what silence gifts you. It cuts the cords of dependence, both his and yours. It teaches you the strength of restraint, the depth of not responding, the clarity of letting silence speak for you. What once felt like passivity now reveals itself as the highest form of control over yourself. He, however, spirals. Some men will rage against silence, demanding answers, accusing you of cruelty. Others will retreat further, disguising their discomfort behind indifference. But no matter the mask he chooses, the truth gnaws beneath it. He feels powerless. He cannot command your voice, cannot summon your presence, cannot force your spirit to respond. And this powerlessness is intolerable to an ego that once thrived on control. For you, this becomes revelation. You begin to see how silence reorders the balance. It shifts the focus from what you cannot change in him to what you can strengthen in yourself. It shows you that love cannot be begged into existence, that respect cannot be bargained for, that worth does not require validation. You find yourself resting more easily in solitude, no longer fearing it, but embracing it as proof of your resilience. And yet, here lies the paradox. As you grow more sovereign in silence, he often grows more desperate, because he senses something he cannot articulate, the loss of his reflection in your eyes. He feels invisible, erased from the stage where he once played the lead role. And for many men, there is no fear greater than this, that a woman who once gave him everything has now given him nothing and flourishes anyway. This is what prolonged silence does. It dismantles illusions, it reveals dependencies, it teaches lessons that no argument, no explanation, no plea could ever achieve. For silence is not empty, it is the most eloquent answer of all. And then silence ripens into its final form, not as weapon, not as resistance, but as freedom. What began as a retreat from his noise transforms into a steady rhythm of your own breath. A state where you no longer wait for him to notice, to change, to return. You sit within yourself, whole, unbroken, radiant in the absence of his gaze. This is the moment that terrifies him most, for he realizes that your silence is no longer directed at him. It belongs entirely to you. For him, it is the collapse of certainty. The ego thrives on control, on the predictability of your reactions. But silence leaves nothing to control. No cues, no signals, no familiar music to dance to. It forces him to see a truth he has resisted, that you are not his possession, not his endless fountain of affirmation, not his mirror. You are your own world. He feels it now, the distance, the coldness, the autonomy. And in his bones, he knows he has lost the power he once thought permanent. For you, silence no longer feels like a stance against him, but like a deep alignment with yourself. Jung called individuation the process of becoming whole. integrating shadow, embracing light, finding the self beyond projections. And this is what silence has given you, the chance to step outside of his projections, his neediness, his dismissals, and to see yourself clearly. No longer the woman defined by his recognition, you become the woman defined by her own essence. The Stoics echo this truth. Seneca warned that those who need others to validate their worth will never find peace. Marcus Aurelius urged the soul to stand upright by itself, not leaning on external pillars. Your silence has become that uprightness. It is no longer a pause waiting for him to fill. It is the cathedral of your being. Bang. Solid, eternal, vast. He feels it as absence, but it is not absence, it is presence, your presence with yourself. This presence is magnetic in a way that noise never was, because noise begs to be answered. Presence simply is, and though he may circle around, though he may reach out, though he may attempt to break through the silence, he cannot touch what you have found, because what you have found is not him, it is you. Notice the shift. At the beginning, silence felt like a wound, a gulf, an unanswered question. Then it became a mirror, reflecting back his fragility, his projections, his dependency. And now it has become a crown. The woman who embraces silence as her ally no longer trembles at the thought of being unseen. She knows her worth is not tied to being witnessed. She knows her voice is not diminished because it rests. She knows that the deepest power is not in noise but in stillness. He may never understand this transformation. He may interpret it as detachment, as indifference, as loss. And perhaps he is right. He has lost something, but what he has lost was never his to own. It was the illusion of ownership, the illusion that your presence could be commanded, your love endlessly assumed, your voice endlessly offered. Your silence shattered that illusion. And so you stand now in a place beyond needing him to feel, beyond needing him to notice, beyond needing him to respond. Silence has become your teacher, your healer, your fortress. It is the threshold into the woman who no longer waits for permission to exist. This is the end of his certainty and the birth of your sovereignty. The silence that once unsettled you has become the silence that crowns you. And within it lies the simplest, most unshakable truth. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses,